All right, so we continue today in our series. We're talking about the generous life of Christ. It's His generous life, and it's supposed to affect our generous life. We're supposed to be as He is. We're supposed to follow Him. To follow Him is to become like Him, right? And where we're at, we're still in Jesus' life. He's collecting His disciples, His followers, those that would give their life for Him, to serve Him, to love Him. And so we looked at 2 weeks ago, you remember, Peter and Andrew, and how God called them, Jesus called them to follow Him. Today we're going to look at this guy named Matthew. Remember Matthew? We're going to look at Matthew's story. Only as we go through Luke doesn't call him Matthew. Luke calls him Levi. I guess Matthew had a different name, another name. I don't know why he's called Levi. It's probably something in his genes. It's bad. Sorry. Oh, where's the groans? Where's the groans? All right, actually, that's his Hebrew name, Levi. So he'll be Levi to us today. So let's just jump right in. Here we go. After this, Jesus went out. Now, remember from last week, he's in a house, and the house is so packed that there's not room to stand. In fact, the men who are bringing their friend who's paralyzed on the mat can't even get in. They go up onto the roof. Okay, that's the house he goes out of. And he saw a tax collector. Now, oftentimes, Jesus would leave the crowds and go after others. He actually lives what he teaches. He teaches the story of the good shepherd who loses a sheep, and he leaves the 99 and goes after the one. This is what Jesus does with his life, and yet it's crazy because he goes and finds a tax collector. He's like Mr. Popular in the house. Everybody loves him. Everybody wants to be around him, and he leaves the house and goes to one that everybody despises, a tax collector, by the name of Levi, sitting at his tax booth. So he's open for business, and if he's like most tax collectors in that day, he's charging way too much. He's just adding on to what Rome requires so that he could profit from it. Now, I'm not accusing Matthew of this because it never says. This is just typical what tax collectors did and why they were despised. So this is who Jesus has gone up to, and he says, "Follow me." He says the same thing that he said to Peter and Andrew, "Follow me." And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. He got up from his tax collecting table and left everything there. He left his scales. He probably left money that he had collected for Rome. He left his important documents that allowed him to actually do this thing, and contacts and who owes what and ledgers and day timers and calendars. He just left it. And he walked away. He walked away. It says he left everything. Now, I got to be just a little transparent here. When I read stories of people who give up everything to go on in the mission field and serve God, and they've left it all behind, and they had a good home, and maybe they were a CEO of a company but gave it all up to work now in an impoverished area, I'm like, oh, that's awesome, you go. That is so good for you. But then I'm like, not for me. I kind of like my stuff. I mean, I don't have as much as you. I didn't give us as much as you, but I like my house, and I like my car, and I like what I do. And it's hard when you hear that, right? I know this is wrong. You're supposed to. You hear other people like are all generous and opening their hands and like give. And what do we tend to do? We close our fists, right? Or we're like, hey, that preacher's talking about money. Where's my wallet? Right? We get this way. We get defensive. I get this way. You? I mean, really, I'm like, oh, I know. I'm supposed to give it away. You know what is hard for me? It's this fact that I have this thing, and I know you don't. You're really cool. Everything's great about you, but I have this thing called an ego. And my ego reminds me of my accomplishments, what I've done, how I've made it. You're so creative. You did this, you know. It just boasts about self, and I kind of like it. I like my ego. Do you like your ego? I like my ego. And it just says to me, you don't want to give that up. Why would you want to give that up? So I look at somebody like this, I'm like, nah, I don't think so. That's good for you. I'll be your biggest fan. Just don't ask me to do it. You like that at all? I mean, just a small part, just a tiny part of you just resists when you hear somebody. And so here I am just reflecting on my life this week, because actually following Jesus isn't easy. Anybody here think following Jesus is easy? Don't raise your hand. You think it's easy? Oh man, it's hard, isn't it? Giving up stuff. I mean, I look at this guy, give up everything, and I gotta share this too, and I know you've heard this from me, probably even recently, and I just have to share my story again, at least part of my story again, because it's not stuff that was the hardest thing for me to give up. I mean, when I started following Jesus, I was a teenager, so I'm living off the wealth of my parents. I wasn't giving up anything. But what I had to give up was heart-wrenching. In fact, here's my story. If you haven't heard it, this will be new. If you've heard it, you're like, oh no, not again, but here goes. Just like playing the slides of your life. Oh, Jeff, we don't want to see those again. But this is important to me, so bear with me. My sister started going to a midweek Bible study, and she wanted me to go along, and I really think she wanted me to go along because I was 16, she was younger, I was the one with the car, I was being used, but that's okay, I went. And I actually enjoyed it. It was midweek worship service, all these kids, and, guitar was played, singing in the dark. This is California, so, it's kind of like the hippie thing, right? And it was like all this touchy-feely stuff, and I wasn't really used to that, but I was starting to, wow, what they're talking about really makes sense to me. And I started listening, and I started going more, and it wasn't because my sister wanted me to go, it's because I wanted to go, and they had these youth sponsors. One of them was an older adult that really started speaking into my life, and I started trusting him with my life a little bit. I mean, a little bit, right? You're kind of guarded. You can know this much. And I began to seriously contemplate following Jesus in a real way. I mean, my grandma had taught me about Jesus and told me about Jesus, but we never went to church. So I started to get serious, and the problem is I also had another life that I didn't give up. I had buddies, I had friends. They were more than buddies, they were close. I loved them, and I hung out with them, and we shared life together, and we partied together. That's what we did. We would go to beach parties, we'd go to home parties, we'd go to the quarry. That's what we did on the weekends. And then I meet this group that's on fire for Jesus and loves Jesus. I lived a double life. I would go to youth group on Wednesday nights, and I would go party on Friday and Saturday nights. I didn't even go to church Sunday morning yet, but I started to later. But still was living my double life. But over time, I began to be really convicted. This isn't how you follow Jesus. I'm lying to everybody, including myself. And so I decided I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the Levi thing. I'm going to get up from the table and I'm going to leave it behind. I'm just going to leave it. My old life is dead to me. I don't want it anymore. I don't want the sin, I don't want the struggle, I don't want the pain. I want to start over. And it was hard. In fact, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I wasn't in the same school district as where I went to church, so the buddies, friends that I was hanging out with, the new friends now, they were in 2 towns over. I didn't know any Christians where I was at, so when I just left. I left my friend group to nothing. I mean, I didn't have anything, and it was weird, and I felt alone. I was like, what am I doing? My friends questioned me, what are you doing? And my best friend, Tim, he would take me aside and say, Jeff, and he would try to reason with me, what in the world? You don't have to. You can continue. You didn't love Jesus. I don't care, but what are you doing to us? The hardest part wasn't just going to school. I mean, going to school I didn't like anyway, right? But then going to school without friends, real friends, man, that was hard. The hardest part was lunchtime. What do you do when you ate with this group and you don't have this group anymore? We ate outside in the amphitheater. That's the advantage of eating, or living in Southern California. School isn't all closed in a building. You guys are weird. Everything's in one building. That's crazy. So we would always eat outside, and unless it rained, but it didn't rain that much. Then we'd be in the cafeteria. So here I'm in the cafeteria because I don't know where else to go. And I'm in the cafeteria, and it's beautiful out, so I'm not there because it's raining. And I'm looking around, who am I going to sit with? And I found some people who were friends, but more like acquaintances. You know how that is. And I was just miserable. I was miserable. I appreciate what Levi did. He gave up. He left that table. None of it was going to be his anymore. He's done with that old life. And to me, a lot of times I think, okay, he left his profession and he left his money. But I left my friends. I left the people I love. And I know you shouldn't compare, but maybe that's what you've experienced too. And I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you've done. I don't know how you got where you're at. I don't know if you're still there at the table struggling to get up. Maybe you are. Maybe you have gotten up from that table and you walked away and you are rock solid in your commitment to staying away, but you still feel the pain of what it felt like and what you lost. Or maybe you did walk away, but you feel the pull to go back. Or maybe, and this is a very real possibility because I've seen it happen to countless people, you're back at that table again. And you're wondering, how did I get here? I left this. Why am I here again? Now, I would love to tell you that when I've gone through the Bible, Levi's example was just an anomaly. That was weird. That's not how it normally happens. That's just an exception to how it normally happens. I would love to tell you that. The problem is, when I go and I look at examples, that's what I see. It's not the exception. It's the norm, right? When Peter and Andrew are challenged to walk away with Jesus, that's what they did. In fact, this is what we're told. We were there. Where'd that come from? Wow. Here it is. So they pulled up their boats. They pulled up their boats up onto shore. They're taking the boats that they actually do fishing in. They're not docking it so they can get back into it. They're pulling them up onto the sand because they're done using them. And they're walking away from it. They left everything and followed him. They left everything and followed him. That's just wild. So, when I was baptized, I was told that I was dying to self. And as a teenager, that was kind of a weird concept, and yet, boy, did it make sense, because I know what it feels like to die. I cut off my friends. A part of me felt like it died. I felt dead. I mean, I know I'm not lost anymore, but I felt lost. I felt like, who am I now? Part of my personality just ripped from me. And so when I read words like what Paul says, we were therefore buried with him through baptism. Buried with him? Yeah, I get that. Into death? That made sense to me. I had this idea that there's nothing about me that needs to live. I'm done for. My life is like, I'm rotten before God. This needs to die. I can't stay who I am. I want to be totally new. I want to put this away, and I want to be new. And that's the imagery I started seeing. Okay, just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life. That's the new life I want. In order for that to happen, I've got to get rid of the junk called Jeff. It can't be me anymore. I need to be somebody totally, totally, totally new. I had to accept this. This was my new life. Or was it? Or was it? What if I'm wrong? What if what I thought happened to me when I got up from my own table and walked away wasn't that I left everything that is Jeff behind? What if what happened was that I left what needed to die behind, but I still lived? What if I misunderstood the whole thing? Because when I thought about it, did I lose my experiences? No, I mean, my childhood, everything was part of me. That's who I am. Did I lose my dreams and my goals and my aspirations? No. Did I lose my skill and my gifting? No. I was still me. So what actually happened when I left that table, when I denied myself, when I died to self? What in the world does it mean to die to self? Because it can't feel like I have lost the core of who I am. The core of who I am is still with me. And as much as I tried to fight it, as much as I tried to reason through it, I'm new, it felt like I was trying to deny the core of me. If we read on in Romans, Paul actually tells us what's supposed to die. And once I understood this, it changed my perspective. And I'd love to tell you that I just woke up one day and I got it. This took a while to get. But here's what Paul says. For we know that our old self was crucified. Up to this point, I get that. Yeah, because my old self is junk. It needs to die. It doesn't need to live anymore. I get that part of it. My old self was crucified with him so that the body of sin might be done away with. Oh, wait a second. The body of sin. Now that's something new to me. What does that mean? Because I'm just thinking all of Jeff is junk. All of Jeff needs to die. And yet Paul's saying, no. I'm talking about the body of sin that needs to be put away. The body of sin that needs to die. What is this? And what Paul is getting at, and sometimes he calls this body of sin actually flesh. But he doesn't actually mean skin and bones. He's talking about the outer person of you that influences the heart. Because it's messing with you. It is trying to make you do what sin wants you to do, which is to go against God. The body of death is working against you, is what Paul's saying, and it's what needs to die. It's what needs to be cut off from you. You know this body of sin. It shows up in lust. It shows up in greed. It shows up in perversion. It shows up in self-congratulations and puffing yourself up and ego boosting. It shows up in the ego. It shows up in I want my way, and I want my stuff, and I want to do it now, and I. That's your sinful nature talking. And it's loud at times, isn't it? That's what Paul's getting at when he's talking about this body of death, this body of sin that you have to cut off, that you have to let God do a surgical procedure in you and sever from you and no longer be in charge of you. You need to treat it as dead. That's why he goes on and says that we should no longer be slaves to sin. That body of death shouldn't rule you anymore, because anyone who has died has been freed from sin. So he's talking about you being buried, dying with Christ, and raising again. If you identify in the death of Christ, that new life that you live, it isn't a new you, it is the real you. You know what comes out of the water is your heart, unhindered by your flesh that is trying to control you and trying to ruin you. What survives is the true you. You see, you don't need a heart that is going to be so different that it doesn't have any of your personality, any of your history, any of your experiences, any of your dreams and goals. What you need is a heart that no longer is controlled by the sinful nature. That's what's new. That's the spiritual change that happens in you. You call it regeneration, whatever you want to call it. You need that new heart because God can't live in sin, and if it's separated from you, your own sinful nature is separated from you spiritually inside, Jesus can place His Spirit in here and He can lead you. He can be the boss in charge now. Even though that old body of death and that sin wants to rear its head, Paul says, here's what I do. I beat my body into subjection. I tell it who's in charge because the Spirit of God is with me, and greater is He who is in you than he who's in the world. All the influences that come from the outside and sin tries to take root in you and tries to pull you down, it has no dominion over you anymore. You can stand up under temptation because you got the Spirit of God in you. You're alive now. And when this all came to me, I get it now. I'm letting the wrong part of me die. I don't have to let my personality die. I don't have to let my experiences die. I don't have to let my talents die and the things that my creativity die. I don't have to let my dreams die. I don't even have to cut off necessarily my old friends. Although there may be friends that need to be cut off. But as a general rule, I don't have to abandon them just because I've changed who I am and whose is mine, who owns me, who is in control. And I love this because I don't know what you're struggling with, but you may be thinking, There's parts of me that I know have a pretty good grip upon me and have influence in the decisions I make. And there's parts of me that pull me in directions I know I shouldn't go. And there are things that do need to die. That old sinful nature, there's language that should die. There's habits that should die. There's places I go that I should cut those off. But it isn't necessarily cutting yourself off from everybody and becoming like a nun or an abbot in a monastery. It may be that you need to recognize that where the work needs to be done is in here. This whole idea, this is wild, because this whole idea of body of death, it's weird, right? That's crazy. You mean we always have body of death with us? This idea that we have this body of death we have to treat as dead to us, that still tries to rear its head, and we have to put it in its place, and we know God is stronger. I mean, this is weird. But Paul uses flesh and uses this body of death imagery to talk about that spiritual battle that is going on in us. And all he's doing when he's talking about this being our flesh and this being in us and this rooting in us, and all he's doing is using Hebrew history. You see, he's Jewish. He grew up knowing that every baby boy had a procedure, a ritual done to him in the flesh, literal flesh, that represented as a people that they're done living for self and they're going to live for God. We still do this procedure, by the way. It's called circumcision. 8 days old, the foreskin would be cut off of an infant, though, back then for a ritual, not just because maybe it's a healthy thing to do. They did it because they were declaring as a people, we want this flesh to be cut off of us. We no longer want to be ruled by our own flesh. We want to be ruled by God who leads us. He leads us through the desert by His cloud and by His Spirit. We want Him to be in charge. We want to be a people set apart to Him. They were declaring every time they did it, we want the flesh's influence in our life to be cut off. I mean, they literally couldn't cut their heart off from their flesh. They'd die. But they could cut off flesh. And God told them to do it, to represent that they're a set-apart people unto God. And so when Paul uses this imagery of flesh, all he's doing is calling back Jewish history and says, this is what needs to happen in you, not physically, but spiritually. In fact, he even tells us, when he spoke to the Colossians, he said this, in Him, Christ, you are also circumcised. Now, he's talking about spiritual circumcision. In putting off the sinful nature, cutting away the sinful flesh that has dominion and control in our life. It changes when we follow Jesus, when we leave that table, when we give our life, when we lay it down, when we die to self. We are being circumcised. We don't do the work God does. In fact, it says, not with the circumcision done by the hands of men, that's what they do to babies, but with the circumcision done by Christ, having been buried with Him in baptism and raised with Him through your faith in the power of God who raised Him from the dead. So the change that is supposed to happen in you is a circumcision of your heart, a change that God does, a work that God does upon your heart. That's what it means to die to self. That means I'm still Jeff. I'm just not messed up Jeff. Well, not messed up as bad Jeff. I have a new master. I have a new Lord. I don't lose my personality. I don't lose my history. I don't lose my experience. I don't lose my gifting. I don't lose my dreams and goals. And I don't lose my friends. In fact, it's real comforting to me when I think about Peter and Andrew, who, remember, they pulled their boats up on the shore, leaving them to dry out there because they're not using them anymore, and they walked away. It's real comforting to me to know that Jesus, when He called Peter and Andrew, actually used these words. And they may confuse you when you hear it at first. You know, why is Jesus using these words? But I think they're comforting. Jesus said to Simon, that's the other name for Peter, don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men. He's using fishing terminology to these fishermen. Wait. I thought they were supposed to die. No, another translation, or not translation, but another gospel says, you will be fishers of men. Wait. How could they be fishers of men? They're supposed to be dead. Nothing of Peter and Andrew survives. That's so not true. Jesus is saying, I'm going to take your talents. I'm going to take your skills. Can you imagine fishermen on God's team? Here's what Jesus is thinking. You guys stay up all night and you work, and sometimes you have no catch. But what do? You go out the next night, and I need that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of passion, that kind of drive. Because here's what I need. I need you to go out every day and talk about me. And there's going to be some people that want no part of that. They won't bite at all. But there's going to be people eventually that bite, and you're going to keep going after them because you are interested in saving their souls as you catch them for Jesus. All he's doing is using their gifts, their talents, their passion, but now for good. And that's what happens to us. Now, I got to confess, I'd love to tell you that I went back to my friends and had this great new passion that I'm going to bring you to Jesus. That's all I'm here. I'm a great evangelist to bring you to Jesus. And I'm going to preach at them all the time, and I'd love to tell you that. I just can't, because I went back in weakness. I went back to my friends because I couldn't stand my new life. This wasn't living to me. I was losing who I was. I didn't go back in the right way, and I should have paid attention to, I told you there was this one youth volunteer, an older man that took me under his wing, and he was helping me in so many incredible ways, and teaching me about how to treat my girlfriend with respect and all that. And I was learning things that nobody ever taught me, nobody ever shared with me. And I should have really relied on him, but out of weakness, I went back to my friends. So I'm not a good example, and I'm not encouraging you to do this. I think if we got the generosity of Christ, we've got to be generous and share it. I want you to go back to your friends, but I want you to do it the right way. So don't take my example. So here's how I went back. I started living my double life again. I started partying with him again. But all along, I've got this new relationship with Jesus. I want so badly for them to know Jesus. And, all right, so here's some transparency for you. It was one night after about 3 beers, I start talking to my friend Tim, and he had a few beers in him as well. I guess I got courage to talk. And I start talking to him about Jesus and relation, and he's actually arguing with me a little bit, but actually he was accepting some of what I was saying, and I thought, this is good. I don't care what the book says on how to evangelize. I think beer is a good way to evangelize. So, again, don't take my example, please. So, I did discover over time, by the way, that I can talk about Jesus a lot clearer when I was sober, and I was also a much better witness. And eventually the rules changed with my friends. It was basically this: you want me to be around, you want me to join you and go places with you and have fun and hang out. You're going to have to accept the new reality, because I love Jesus. And I'm going to talk about Jesus, and I'm going to do my best to live for Jesus. And actually, again, it's not real smart to just be the only one, and because what happens is they all pull you down, right? Instead of you pulling them up. So this is kind of an anomaly in the sense that it actually worked a little bit, because I got Tim to start getting serious about his relationship with Jesus. And over time, Tim and I have had an amazing relationship over the years, and we call each other about once a week, and we talk about Jesus, and we hold each other accountable, because this thing called life is tricky, isn't it? So I didn't do it the right way, and it's not a model for you. I would encourage you to do it this way. You live life with Jesus. It's all about Jesus. You do it in community. I should have had a community like youth sponsors helping me through this and holding me up, because it's so easy to be pulled down. But when you got the community up here, we can pull our brothers out. We can pull our friends up. And that's how it should be done. We should live on mission. We got to pull them up. If we've got the generosity of Christ, we've got to pull them up. So we began with this verse. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth, completely absorbed in his wealth and his job and his life and his cheating, probably. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. He pushed himself away from the table, left the scale, left the papers, left the money, left everything. Only he didn't leave himself. He just left the sinful things that were influencing his life. He was done with that. He was ready to be the Levi God had created Levi to be, and all the experiences and all the passion and all the skills and all the dreams, he was going to use those. God's going to use that in Levi and help Levi to be one that would use that skill to share with others. He didn't leave any of that behind. He only left his sin behind and the sinful nature and the things that influenced his heart for wrong. But his heart was good now because he's walking now closely with Jesus. Oh, by the way, he didn't leave his friends behind either. And this is what I love about Levi. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors were there. He said, Jesus, you've got to come to my house. I have some friends I'm going to invite. We're going to have this great feast, and you've got to be there because I want them to know you. I want them to be able to push away from their own tables of their own sin nature and discover what it's like to be free, to be truly alive, to be how you created. You've got to talk to my friends. And Jesus was more than willing. There were others eating there. These were all friends. These are friends of Levi. He didn't leave them behind. He accepted that God has given him this gift called mercy and grace. He's been set free. He can't leave his friends behind. He's got to bring them. Of course, the religious leaders can't stand this. The Pharisees, all the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect, complained to his disciples, said, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? See, in their mind, and we get this so wrong, and it was in my mind at first too. In their mind, they're thinking the way you follow after God is you cut off everyone who is a sinner. You just cut them out of your life. You don't associate with them. You don't talk to them. They're gone. You leave them behind. Why in the world would you sit down and have a meal with them? And Jesus says, you got it all wrong. All wrong. He said this, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. He said, it's not about you cutting out your friends. The work that needs to be cut out is in you. You Pharisees, you teachers of the law, you have a heart that is influenced by your power and your greed and your self-interest, and you want the glory. You cut that off. You let that die. You let what Jesus did on the cross, dying for you, be enough, and you get set free. That's what it means to live a set-apart life. That's what it means to let the body of death die. Again, I said I didn't know, individual stories where you are at right now. I'm wise enough to know that in this room there are those who look like you have it all together, and yet you're still sitting at that table. Maybe you've gone back to it. You're allowing, and you realize by now that sitting at that table, all that means is you're allowing all the things that are in your sinful nature to influence your heart. They're actually in control, or at least have a good voice in your life. This is where you need to realize when Jesus went to the cross and died, that his death was the ultimate cutting of flesh. When he bled out entirely, his was the first that went all the way. No flesh was good enough to be a sacrifice for us. Jesus was the ultimate circumcision. He bled out fully for our sins. Now we need to let him do the spiritual work in our hearts of cutting out the influence of our own flesh. And if you've never accepted what Jesus did on the cross, this is your moment. We're going to sing a song of invitation. You come. I would love to share with you. I'd love to share with you how to get up from your table. I'd love to share with you what this thing called baptism is all about, because maybe for you, you've heard it or you've seen it, and you just don't really get it. I hope you get it a little bit more this morning. I'd love to sit down and talk with you about baptism. Maybe for you, You've been there. Now you're back, though, letting the flesh control you. This is also your invitation. Maybe in your seats to confess to God again, I've returned to where I should not have returned. Or maybe you need prayers from the church. You just come forward and we'll pray for you. We'll let you right here, right now, rededicate your life. And we'll surround you in prayer as you rededicate your life. This is your invitation. And I just invite you. I beg you to come. Will you stand? Father God, we come to you as people who mess around way too much with the influence of the flesh. We like how it feels, or we go back for whatever reason that flesh pulls us back. Our desire is to serve you and to live for you and to walk with you and to push away from that table and to leave it behind and to never go back. And we ask that you would help us. If we've never made a decision for you, make it right now. If we need to rededicate our life, to rededicate it right now. We pray for decisions this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.